Archaeodeath, Death and Memory, Past and Present, with Professor Howard Williams.
On the MA Archaeology of Death and Memory at the University of Chester, we explored different kinds of archaeologies of remembrance and commemoration from prehistory to the present day. And in today's video I want to introduce you to one 20th century memorial that's within walking distance of my home, where I can tell you about some of the key themes in an archaeological approach to memorialisation through the centuries. Now I'm at Pandy on Bluebell Lane, which is the site of the Gresford Colliery, which from 1908 opened by the Westminster and United Collieries Group through to 1934 was one of the deepest and largest collieries of the Wrexham coalfield, the North Wales part of a broader stretch of mining communities and industry that went north and incorporated Lancashire too. And here at just outside Wrexham, the modern town of Wrexham, at Pandy, very close to Gresford Colliery was one of the biggest and deepest collieries. Now on 2 a.m. on the 22nd of September 1934, during therefore the night shift, there was a double shift taking place so that miners could be free during the day to attend a football game, and there was over 500 men down in the deep pits in two different areas, and there was at 2 a.m. an explosion. That explosion may have been caused by a number of factors, although the inquest afterwards never determined the precise cause. There was possibly poor ventilation, it was very hot in the deeper part of the mine, and also there were various questions about safety regulations, including the too many shot firing exercise practices going on within a shift. Now we don't know why the explosion took place, but the explosion happened, and it started an inferno that burned and blocked escape for most of the miners working in the Dennis shaft. 6 men got out, and a rescue team was sent down, and for days people waited on the surface. They tried to cap the mine and try to hope that somebody would survive, but sadly the total death toll of men was 266, and it's estimated that 253 bodies of miners are still entombed over a mile underground beneath this site and to its east. This was one of the greatest mining disasters in terms of size. Men lost, the largest mining disasters of the British industrial history, and for the 20th century it was Wales's largest loss of human life. It left a legacy for this area. It left hundreds of widows, hundreds of children without fathers, and there was thousands of men unemployed by the closure of the mine following the disaster. In terms of the resonance of this disaster, it hits deep and long into the communities, not simply of Wrexham town, but the many coal mining communities in the sort of penumbra around it, from Brumbo to Gresford to Cley and Boris and Acton, areas and districts from which the men came to work here. And really, this is a long process. Like any disaster, it's not something that people can immediately mourn and move on. And indeed, here we are in 2020. We're over 80 years after the mining disaster, and every year there's a remembrance service. But it took until the 1980s. It took until 1982. And that is not a coincidence. 1982, when the coal mining industry in Britain was dying, it was on its knees and ahead of the the coal mining strike, one of the most contentious and bitter times in recent British history, in the Thatcher era, that the Prince and Princess of Wales, that's Charles and Diana, opened a memorial that had been long lobbied for, had long sought, on the site of the colliery, and that's where I am today. So I've tried to give you a bit of an introduction to some of the key facts of the Gresford mining disaster, but as an archaeologist, my interest lies in what survives and what memorials are raised, and their form and their materials, their location, and the way they develop. And for that story, that's something I want to talk about now, in relation to the Gresford Mining Disaster Memorial. Now, in terms of location, this is on the site of the disaster. This is on a part of the former colliery, and next to a conservatory sales, a sports ground, a social club, a car wash, and also an industrial estate and a housing estate of noughties and 90s houses. I think it's noughties, about 15 years old, these houses. Things have taken over and accrued over the site of the coal mine, including the from 30 years ago, 40 years ago actually, the A483 road between Chester and Wrexham goes over the edge of the edge of the colliery. So the landscape has been subsumed. The former traces of the colliery have long gone, and the memorial sits as in an island, a sombre island, very well mown grass, and features within this surrounding busy landscape. Actually, the cars are light on the roads today because we're still in the lockdown when I'm doing this video, but usually it's so loud here you can't really have a quieter, reflective moment. But the memorial is located therefore on the site of the disaster, on the site of the former colliery. The other point to make is that it's carefully demarked with a fence. It has a circular space as the focus. This is the focus of the pit head, and the actual memorial itself is a pit head wheel set in slate blocks. Has become a common memorial form for mines, former mining sites, and the sites of mining disasters. But here, of course, the fact that the wheel is erect, upright, alluding to the former structure and shape of a pit head wheel, a stone version of the metal sort of frame, and yet, of course, it's never going to turn again. It's fixed. In stasis, its motion frozen, is very evocative. The relationship between heaven and earth and the deep tomb below ground where those bodies will never, the mine has become a tomb, fixed in without an ability to turn again. It is both a very powerful and evocative symbol of loss, and perhaps for some a sense of the aspirations of resurrection and a heavenly destination for those poor individuals that lost their lives. In addition to that, there is you can see over my shoulder, there is a formal plaque explaining the disaster, and then, like a war memorial, and this is another point to make, it is very much like a war memorial, columns of the names of the men whose lives were lost. So one has here a very distinctive form of mining disaster memorial. It's a very industrial memorial type, using the actual physical remains of the pit as the focus, rather than some statuary or some sort of abstract, doves or, evocation of a miner. And in that sense, it's very different from a war memorial. There's no attempt to celebrate or to add a sense of sacrifice to the loss. There's no sublimation into sacrifice. There's no attempt to make the deaths meaningful. They are not meaningful deaths. They're horrible, grim way to die in an industry that killed people daily and weekly all over the world, and still does. There is no attempt here to make it meaningful, to give meaning to this memorial. In that sense, it's a meaningless memorial, but it's powerful in that sense, but it's not trying to glorify. And yet, having said that, there is a lot of war memorialisation crossover into the form and character of the memorial within a garden setting with memorial benches. And it has focused on floral deposition, and artefacts and other objects are placed below the names, an annual memorial service, as I've said, and a series of memorial benches. Now, that's there's further things one could talk about: the materiality of the slate and the steel wheel, and the sense of vertical distance evoked, and the subterranean and sort of celestial or aerial illusions that the wheel incorporates, of descent and ascent. There's more one could talk about: the materials, the local materials, the Welsh slate used to make it. One could also say the military connections, but the distinction from military memorials. The other thing I wanted to say about the memorial is about the new benches that have been put around it, and these are worthy of looking at too, and I shall spin the camera and let you look at them. Now, in the last few years, there's been a evolution in memorial benches, very much inspired by the First World War centenary commemorations to evoke the silhouette. And so what's interesting here is that for a mining disaster memorial, the traditional physical pit working is a part of the memorial benches, using the silhouettes of, it's almost are these representing the dead men themselves, or just the labour of the colliery? So at one level, this evokes the whole life. It's not just about the men that died, but the whole life of being a miner, and the communities that thrived but also suffered through the mining industry. And I think that there's so much that this is powerful in the use of the silhouette of the back of the memorial bench, and the apertures creating the shape. Now, there's two of them. There's the first one. Let me show you the second one. And this one, very much evoking the latter history of the pit wheel there, giving a sense of the lives beyond the pit, below ground, and the suffering, and the mixture of benefits and toil. But there's a further one here, which is a replica of that one. I mean, it's the same as that one. But there's a final point, links to my point about war memorialisation, because as well as these three, in addition to these three mining focused silhouetted memorial benches, there's this one. And this is a very standard one. And this is standard in the sense that we find this in many memorial gardens associated with war memorials. And here we've got the First World War evoked. And one could say that there's a bit of an issue here. Even though the bench was provided by Gresford Community Council in memory of those Gresford colliery mine workers who fought for their country in the First World War, the connection is perhaps strained slightly. It detracts a bit from the central focus. It's still about the lives of those that linked to the communities and their loss and their sacrifice. But the play to make this about a sacrificial memorial is well, let's just say it's interesting dimension. And finally, to allow you to see some of the almost like corporate style additional sort of new plaque added to the side of it, which I think is, again, though it's recognising the Red Generation Trust, the contribution, one could say that that's a bit of a sort of almost like a corporate tagging of the memorial, which is a little distracting. But here's the reason why it's here. Here are the names. Some of the offerings. So this is May now, so we're far away from the September memorial service. And plants, and then the memorial itself.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the Archaeodeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.